My name is Myra, and I was 33 years old on the day I got married into a family that had already made a plan for me to disappear. Our wedding reception was held in a grand country club ballroom just outside of Charlottesville, a room filled with white roses and the kind of old family wealth that had mostly faded, even if those who carried the name refused to admit it. I remember standing behind the bar, trying to fix my veil, using the polished copper wall as a makeshift mirror because there was nothing else nearby. That copper wall is the only reason I saw what my mother-in-law was doing, and it is the only reason my life did not fall apart that day. Patricia was standing directly behind me, close enough that I could have turned and touched her. She had no idea that the burnished metal in front of me was reflecting everything. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my glass of champagne, the one with a small gold ribbon she had tied around the stem, so she would know which belonged to the bride. I watched her reach into her small purse and pull out a tiny glass bottle. She tipped it carefully and let 3 clear drops fall into my drink. Then she tucked the bottle away, smoothed her jacket, and turned to smile at someone across the room as though nothing had happened at all. I did not turn around. I did not gasp or freeze. I had spent 8 years working in a hospital emergency room, and that kind of work teaches you something that cannot be learned anywhere else. It teaches you to keep your face completely still while your mind moves at full speed. While Patricia was busy charming the room, I finished adjusting my veil, composed myself, and made a decision in the space of a few heartbeats. I turned around, told her I was terribly thirsty, and offered to carry both glasses myself. She couldn't refuse. There were people watching. I took both glasses, kept my back to her for just a moment, and handed her the one with the gold ribbon. She didn't notice. People tend to see exactly what they expect to see, and she expected the drug glass to be in my hands. We walked out to the center of the room together. She tapped her glass. The room fell quiet, and she looked directly into my eyes and said the words she had said the night before the rehearsal dinner. "To family, the real kind." Then she raised that gold ribbon glass and drank deeply, while I only touched mine to my lips without swallowing a drop. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to know who I was before I ever walked into that ballroom. I grew up on a small dairy farm in the Shenandoah Valley, in a home where the kitchen smelled like coffee at 4 a.m, because my father was already awake and working. He milked 70 cows by hand when the machines broke down, which was often. When I was 19, a letter arrived from the bank that nearly took everything from us. I watched my mother read it twice, fold it into a small square, and say quietly that we would find a way through it. And we did. I worked 2 jobs while attending nursing school at night, and every dollar I could spare went home until the debt was cleared. Nobody gave me anything freely. I learned to read people the same way my father read the land, watching for small signs that others missed. The slight tightening around the eyes, the hands going suddenly still, the smile that arrived a half-second too late in the emergency room. That skill kept people alive. The patients who said they were fine were often the ones who needed the most attention. By the time I was 30, I was a head nurse, the person everyone called when a room was falling apart. I was steady in the worst moments. What I was not good at was letting anyone help me. I had built my whole life around being the one who fixed things, and I had confused that kind of strength with closeness. It would cost me something, that habit, but it would also save me. I met Daniel Vance at the hospital. He had brought his uncle in with chest pains and sat in that waiting room for 9 hours without once complaining or asking anyone to hurry. I noticed his patience before I noticed anything else about him. We dated quietly for a year before he took me to meet his mother. The Vance property was a large house on 40 acres, with white pillars and a long gravel drive and a portrait of a general no one could quite identify. Patricia greeted us at the door with a smile that always appeared just a moment after it should have. When I told her my family were dairy farmers, she repeated the word farmers the way someone might repeat a word they found written on the bottom of their shoe. She called it wholesome, in a tone that meant the opposite. And at dinner she found occasion twice to mention the family trust and the Vance name. When I got up to help clear the table, she took my arm gently and said, with a smile, that you could put a nurse in a white wedding dress, but she was still just a help. The table laughed as though it were a joke. Daniel didn't laugh. He found my hand beneath the table and held it. In that moment, I understood two things. Patricia saw me as hired help who had wandered into the wrong photograph. And the family money she spoke of with such reverence was not nearly what she implied. For 3 years, she worked on me with what I can only call polite cruelty. It was never a single large blow, only a steady series of small ones. She seated me at the children's table at Thanksgiving and called it cozy. She gave me a gift card at Christmas because she claimed not to know my tastes. In every family photograph, someone handed me the dog to hold. So I would be pushed to the edge of the frame. I have no pictures of myself from those years. If I ever mentioned the way she treated me, I became the problem. So I stopped mentioning it, and I started paying closer attention instead. Over time, I came to understand the real shape of the family situation. They lived almost entirely on a trust fund, and Daniel's share covered nearly everything we had: the car, the house, the club membership. Patricia controlled access to that money, with the help of the family lawyer, a man named Gerald Pryor. Daniel wasn't greedy, but he was dependent, and dependence is a very quiet kind of trap. I kept asking myself why a woman with so much control would spend so much energy trying to diminish someone she considered beneath her. Cruelty that deliberate comes from fear. I should have understood that sooner. By the time I did, we were already engaged, and the wedding was being planned by the one person who frightened me most. Daniel proposed on the back porch of my family's farm, in front of my parents, with my father's old barn in the background. He chose that place because he knew it would make me happy, and I loved him for it. I expected Patricia to fight the wedding. She didn't, and that absence of resistance was the warning I should have heeded. Within a week, she had offered to plan everything herself, to spare me the stress of organizing a celebration while working long hospital shifts. She chose the venue, the flowers, the seating, the cake. When I once tried to adjust the guest list, she squeezed my hand and told me to let her do this for me. The sweetness of it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't fully name. The one element she was most insistent on controlling was the champagne toast. She wanted to pour the glasses herself and say a few words to bless the marriage. Daniel thought it was touching. I thought it was strange that a woman who had never genuinely wished me well was suddenly eager to bless my most important day. But I was exhausted from 4 long shifts a week, and I told myself I was being uncharitable toward someone who was finally making an effort. I let her have the toast. That is the moment I return to most often now, not with anger, but with a clear understanding of how exhaustion and the wish to be wrong can lower your defenses in ways that nothing else can. The rehearsal dinner night before was warm and perfectly arranged. Patricia gave a speech she pretended not to have rehearsed, laughed at my father's farm stories, and raised her glass to family the real kind. My mother squeezed my arm with happiness. I watched Patricia's face and saw the cold steadiness behind her eyes that her smile couldn't reach. There's a look that nurses learn to recognize on the hardest nights, the look of someone performing an emotion they do not feel. Patricia had that look. Daniel whispered that his mother was finally coming around. I nodded because I wanted to believe him. The wedding day was bright and hot. The vows were beautiful. Daniel cried. When the reception began and the champagne was set out, I slipped behind the bar to fix my veil, and I saw everything I have already described. I saw the bottle, the drops, the gold ribbon, and the careful way she tucked the evidence back into her purse. I made the switch. I watched her drink. About 40 minutes into the reception, Patricia's words began to blur. She laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny, reached for her water glass and missed it entirely, and then began to slump at her chair. Her daughter Caroline rushed over, pale with alarm. Gerald Pryor was right behind her. It took 2 guests and a waiter to help Patricia out to the car. She moved like someone who didn't know where her feet were, and every one of her carefully curated friends watched it happen. People whispered that she must have had too much wine. Others said they had never seen her like that before. I stood in my white dress and watched and felt nothing like satisfaction. I felt the cold, focused clarity I feel when a situation at work has just become serious, and there is no room for anything except precision that I still had her glass in my purse. I told Daniel nothing yet. I had no proof beyond my own eyes and a glass, and I had learned long ago that accusations without evidence only make the accuser look unstable. I would stay calm. I would keep the evidence. I would let the facts carry the story. That night at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. By the small hours of the morning, I had nearly convinced myself, I had imagined the worst of it, that perhaps the bottle had been something harmless, that I was overwrought and tired. Then I took the glass into the bathroom and held it under bright light, and saw a thin residue along the bottom that had no business being there. My hands knew what to do before my mind had finished deciding. I sealed the glass in a clean bag, wrote the date and time on it, and treated it exactly as I would treat evidence at the hospital. If I was wrong, I would throw it away quietly and no one would ever know. If I was right, I was going to need every careful step I had taken that on Monday. I went back to work and spoke privately with my colleague Renee, who works in the laboratory. I didn't ask her to test the glass at the hospital, because that would not have been appropriate, but I asked her how to preserve the integrity of what I had, so that a court would find it credible. She told me to send it to an independent lab, keep everything sealed, and document each step. She said that if it turned out to be nothing, I would feel briefly foolish, and that if it turned out to be something, I would be very glad I had been careful. I sent it away and waited that on the 5th day of waiting I tried to talk to Daniel. He was distracted and worried about his mother, who had retreated to her room claiming exhaustion. I told him what I had seen. The bottle, the drops, the switch. He went very still and then became upset. He told me his mother was difficult, not criminal. That response felt like a door closing in my face. I didn't show him the glass or describe the lab. I decided to wait for the results. That weekend we attended a family brunch at the Vance house. Patricia played the fragile invalid to perfection. In the hallway, I came upon Caroline and Gerald in a hushed conversation, Gerald holding a thick folder. I heard the words, "The timing matters now," before they saw me and went silent. Whatever Patricia had done at the wedding, she had not done it alone. The lab results arrived on my phone while I was sitting in my truck in the hospital parking lot. The substance was a powerful sedative. If I had drunk what was in that glass, I would have collapsed in front of every guest at my own wedding and been carried out looking exactly as Patricia needed me to look. Unstable, unfit, a woman be quietly set aside. She hadn't wanted to harm me physically. She had wanted to destroy my credibility so completely that no one would question what came next. 2 days later, Daniel brought home a folder from his mother, a set of papers she wanted us to sign. When he went to shower, I opened it. There was a legal agreement stripping me of rights in the event of divorce, and a petition to annul the marriage on grounds that I behaved in an unfit manner at the reception. The dates on the documents were from before the wedding. They had drawn up the papers for a marriage they intended to end before it had properly begun. The drug was simply the mechanism. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, I sat him down and put the lab report and the dated documents in front of him. I told him to look at the dates. I watched the understanding move across his face, like weather crossing a valley. He saw it. He understood. And he was heartbroken in a way that people are when they finally see clearly something they've been avoiding for a long time. Patricia escalated. She began calling relatives and suggesting I had a problem with alcohol, laying the groundwork for the story she needed people to believe. It was a precise and calculated campaign. I understood then that I couldn't fight it with words or arguments or appeals to people's sympathy. I could only fight it with documentation. I hired a lawyer named Joan and went to the police and told Daniel everything I was doing and asked him to choose his position. He chose mine. He stood beside me, and that mattered more than I can properly say. Joan helped me understand the full scope of what had been happening. Caroline had significant debts. Gerald had been stealing from the trust for years. The entire family had been living on borrowed time and borrowed money, and my arrival in Daniel's life had felt to Patricia like the approach of someone who might eventually see through performance. She needed me gone before I understood enough to be dangerous. That we arranged a meeting at the Vance house. Patricia, Caroline, and Gerald arrived expecting to finalize my removal from the family. They had even brought a minister, as though moral pressure might accomplish what documents couldn't. I let them speak first. Then I opened my folder. I laid out the lab report, photographs of the glass, statements from staff members at the bar, documentation of financial irregularities, and the evidence of Gerald's theft. I told them calmly that the police were already involved. The room went silent in the way that rooms only go silent when something irrevocable has just occurred. Patricia shouted. Gerald moved toward the door. Caroline turned on her mother. And in the middle of all of it, Daniel stood up placed his hand on my shoulder, and told his mother that I was his real family now. We walked out together and did not go back. Patricia was criminally charged for what she put in my drink. Gerald lost his position and faced investigation for the theft. The grand house and the old name and the careful performance of wealth all came undone. Daniel and I began again without the trust fund, without the club membership, without any of the things that had been used to keep him attached to a world that had been slowly poisoning us both. We were, for the first time, simply ourselves. That I still work as a nurse. I am still the person people call when a room is falling apart. What I know now, more clearly than I ever did before, is that staying calm is not the same as staying silent, and that evidence is not cold or unfeeling. It is simply the truth made impossible to ignore. If something feels wrong, it is worth paying attention to. Keep what you find. Document what you witness. You do not need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.